All right, we'd like to get started on time, and we can all get out of here at a reasonable hour. First off, I'm here on behalf of the Board of Selectmen. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Mike Gillette. I'm very pleased that we continue to have participation from the neighborhood on this project. This is our fourth public session on it. We continue to listen carefully to what gets said at these meetings and make revisions to the plans in this process. So we appreciate you coming. We hope you can see the progress that's being made by the comments that we're receiving. So please continue to give us input. In that spirit, we're all professional. We're here to listen, and we ask that the questioning and that. But I really say that. I oftentimes don't need to in Westwood. It's a town that really is respectful, so I know we'll continue to do that. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Todd, and DPW Director, and he'll introduce the team and what we'll be accomplishing here tonight. So thank you very much on behalf of the Board of Selectmen.
So I'd like to welcome everybody once again. As Mike had mentioned, this is our fourth public informational session regarding the Gay Street corridor and the potential of a sidewalk. Last time we had met was back in June, believe it or not. When we were standing here, the sun was actually glaring in as if it was tonight. Same concept. We had some lag time between where we stand now and when that June meeting concluded. A lot of what we took out of that meeting were inquiries about where could the sidewalk actually go. We then took those messages to the Board of Selectmen, and they told us to reach out to the residents along Gay Street. Only the residents that could potentially accommodate the sidewalk on the other side of the rock wall. It took some time to contact those residents, reach out to them, have some good conversations with them. Some of them, to be honest with you, were extremely brief. I think they thought I was initially a telemarketer calling, just trying to sell it. In all honesty, that's some of the feedback that I received. I did have some good conversations, though. A lot of residents were very much for the project, but wanted nothing to do with the sidewalk being on their side of the property, on their side of the rock wall. I did talk to a couple of residents that were for that, and you'll see within the design those locations that were willing to accommodate the sidewalk on their side of the rock wall. The other thing that we were looking into is obviously funding mechanisms if and when this project does come to fruition. Obviously, we've had a lot of success with the Complete Streets program. So we try to dive into programs such as that through the Massachusetts TIP program. So we got some feedback. We actually met with District 6 representatives that represent our community throughout the process. I came here to town. Mike was here with his team from TEC. We discussed the project. The criteria for the state over the years has changed with respect to money and opportunities that they like to provide communities. Nowadays, they like to see bicycle lanes. They like to see sidewalks on both sides. Obviously, as you know, where we've taken this design and the approach we've taken and the several discussions we've had and what we're trying to do within the Gay Street corridor, sidewalks on both sides and bicycle lanes will significantly disrupt that stretch of roadway. And we were trying to work with the state, see if they could make any exceptions. So we were waiting until recently we found out that unless we install those within our criteria, within our design, the state wouldn't entertain giving us any funding for this project. That said, we've proceeded with a municipal design, being we can design it however we want to as a community, work with the individuals. I actually did try to explain to the state, we have residents here that are very concerned about the aesthetics, about what currently exists along Gay Street, and they tried to throw analogies and comparisons at me saying, well, there are other communities that can work around this stuff. Well, I tend to think that Westwood is very unique, and we like to preserve what's out there. I don't want to try to throw something at the public and say, well, this is what we're going to do because there is a chance that the state might fund it. I don't think it would be fair to the residents. I don't think it would be fair to our approach thus far throughout this process, where we have made some strides. We have made some accommodations based on some requests and some desires in the community, and rightfully so. Gay Street is a beautiful stretch of roadway. It's very unique. It's not like other communities that have worked their way or navigated their way through problems or said we could squeeze this and this will work. This is different. Westwood is a different community, and you know, obviously with the level of involvement that we've had consistently over these meetings and the way that we have been working through together, sometimes it's been aggressive, but in a good way. I think we have made some strides. That said, Mike Myers from TEC is here. Jonathan Rockwell from TEC is here. They've been working very diligently on this project from day one with us. Little history from this group of individuals. We started with them years ago with the Safe Routes to School project over at the Downey School. We've since accomplished 2 very, very, very successful Complete Streets programs, by which we did receive funding from the state. So it only made sense to bring them in from day one to work with us throughout this whole process. They're great, and their presentation skills have been fantastic, and I know a lot of you already are familiar with them. So that said, I'll hand it off to Mike Myers, and he can kind of go through where we stand.
All right. Well, thanks, Todd. So what I'd like to do is just spend a little time recapping the last meeting that we had on June 6th, and then talk a little bit about what we've been up to since that last meeting. That shouldn't take long since Todd did such a good job updating there. And at the end, we'll do some questions. What I ask for those questions is try to keep them very high level about the project, about the process. If you have very specific questions that pertain to the tree in front of your house or what might my driveway look like, we also have, in addition to John, we have Jake Carmody and Lauren Nicholson, a couple of our best engineers that have been on this project since day one. So you have the resources here to help you understand the details, the level of details, and what things might look like in front of your property. So I certainly encourage you all to take advantage of that at the end of the meeting. First, just a quick show of hands if you were not at the last meeting in June. Okay, so quite a few people. Good. Okay. So just a quick recap. At our last meeting, this was our third meeting, June 6th. This was, if you recall, this was the first time we really had some information for you. We had some details. We started some of the sausage making on this project and started really looking at some of the details so we could present some data, some facts to you, and make very good educated decisions moving forward. At this stage, we looked at 2 sidewalk alternatives. One that was entirely along the north side, and then one on the north side until it reached Thatcher, crossing over, staying on the south side, crossing Milk, and tying into the existing sidewalk up by Buckboard Lane. With those 2 sidewalk alternatives, we looked at a couple of cross-sectional alternatives through the corridor. So we had 4 alternatives altogether, put them into a matrix, so that way we could present to you the impacts associated with each of those alternatives. Just to recap on, again, on the different alternatives here. On the first one, you can see the green line along the north side of Gay Street, the entire length representing a new sidewalk along the north side. Alternative 2, you can see where we'd cross at Thatcher and then continue along the south side, crossing Milk Street, and then tying to this existing sidewalk here. And then if you were going to continue along, you'd cross again at Pine Lane at the existing crossing. This is just a snapshot of the 2 alternatives we looked at for the sections. Not much difference here. The only difference is the 10-foot lane versus the 11-foot lane. When we first dove into this project, we really thought about, just 2 alternatives, but the corridor is so sensitive that we really wanted to take a closer look and make sure we looked at these 2 cross-sectional alternatives as well. So this was the matrix that was presented at that last meeting. Along the left side, especially in red, you're going to find the critical resource areas, the wetlands, the trees based on size, and stone walls. So stone walls, the impacts by linear footage, wetlands by square footage, and the number of trees. Quantified a couple of other things such as easements, right of entries, fence relocations, and utility poles that would have to be moved. But we really wanted to focus on the areas in red because that's what we heard at our first 2 meetings. Those were the areas that were really sensitive to the corridor, stone walls in particular, trying to retain that character that's out there today. Going from left to right, you can see obviously the alternative 1A, 1B on the left, 2A, 2B on the right. You can see that one of the major differences between 1 versus 2, the number of trees. You're looking at anywhere around 60 trees with alternative 1, alternative 2, just south of 100 trees with that alternative. Next thing we did was basically took out the two 11-foot travel lane alternatives and put the two 10s side by side. So now we have the two sidewalk alternatives with 10-foot travel lanes. And as you look at these two, again, the main difference is the number of trees, 60 to 90. We took this one step further. The top row shows the pedestrian crossings. We've got to also look at this not just from an impact perspective, but from a safety perspective. With alternative 1, if you were walking along on a sidewalk from High Street, you could go all the way to Washington and stay on the same side of the road. With alternative 2, you would cross at Thatcher, cross again at Milk Street, albeit a side street that's stop controlled. At our early meetings, we heard that that was a major concern of the residents, to make sure we don't have people trying to cross Milk Street. You'd continue along and cross for a third time at Pine Lane. So once we took account for that pedestrian crossing, it was, really pretty clear for us to recommend alternative 1A. Can you hold those to the end? Thank you. So as Todd mentioned, since our last meeting, we've been looking at multiple things. One is just more detail. We've been looking at a lot more detail with the plans. Here's a summary of some of the things that Jake and Lauren have been working on in the office, and that's, looking at grading limits, reevaluating the stone wall impacts, driveways, walkways, trees, mailboxes. How are these things impacted? What's the detail like? And one of the other major design components is drainage. Anytime you introduce a vertical granite curb to the edge of the roadway, it's going to drop water, where today it flows off. So we need to install drainage to make sure that's conveyed efficiently and safely for the environment. So we looked at a lot of detail, and then as Todd mentioned, one of the focus points of our last meeting was looking at opportunities to put the sidewalk behind the stone wall in which an easement would be secured from the property owner. So just a brief summary of that evaluation of different layout alternatives. There are 35 properties along the north side of Gay Street, but we have challenges, as we've continuously talked about the theme with resource areas, topography, whether you have a steep slope up or a steep slope down, location of houses. Not every house is set far back from Gay Street. Many of them are up close. Once we took a look at those three challenges, we had 3 properties in which Todd and his staff were successful in contacting all 11 property owners, and found that 3 of them were okay with looking at this type of alternative, where the sidewalk would fall behind the stone wall within an easement. This is just west of Fox Meadow. So overall, we'd have 1,000 feet, about 12% of the project, where the sidewalk would be able to be installed behind the stone wall. So as Todd mentioned, we met with the state. We got feedback from the state. The recommendation was that pedestrian and bicycle accommodations would be required to get state funding. Don't want you to fall out of your chair. I did bring just a sketch of what that would look like so everyone can see. We need to do our due diligence to show you what that would look like to incorporate bicycle accommodations. This is a recap of where we currently are, 50% design, current sidewalk project. The pavement out there is about 26 feet wide. With a sidewalk alone, 5-foot sidewalk, we'd have about a 30-foot roadway. So you can visualize about a 4-foot increase to the roadway throughout the corridor. And here's the level of assessment on the impacts. These are a little different than the previous slide because as we went from 30 to 50, we reevaluated those impacts and refined them a little, but they're still pretty consistent with what you saw on the previous slide. This is what DOT, this would be their expectation, to include a bicycle accommodation. So again, up top, you can see the 26 feet of existing pavement. And then these are two alternatives for bicycle accommodations. The one on the middle is a, what we'd call an on-road bicycle facility. Basically, you'd have a 5-foot bike shoulder with a painted bike symbol and a painted arrow every several hundred feet in the roadway. And then the one on the bottom would be an off-road facility. This would have a path that would be shared by pedestrians and bicyclists off the road. You'd need to provide a buffer from the road, as well as enough shoulder on the opposite direction for an experienced rider that wanted to stay in that direction. The most important thing to note about these sections is that the distance between here, this is your right-of-way limit, to here, from Milk Street to the east is 40 feet. So this would be 38 of that, and it just wouldn't work. The impacts would be detrimental to the character of your roadway. The rock walls generally are at the right-of-way line, but that doesn't mean they're not impacted with a 38-foot section. The wetlands and the trees are also within the right-of-way line, so the impacts are going to be much more. I mean, these are all going to go up dramatically if we went from 30 feet to 38 feet in widening of the corridor. So again, this is not what we're proposing by any means. We're just trying to give you the perspective of what the state would expect as far as a bicycle accommodation and what that might look like. So next steps, as Todd mentioned, we'll be reporting back to the Board of Selectmen, make sure we give them a summary of all the impact, all the input and feedback we get tonight. We do want to report back our feedback from the state, because that was part of the due diligence, to go out and try to find other options for funding. And then this is just a snapshot on the left. You can see the next steps of advancing this project from 50% to 90%, go through environmental permitting, spring and summer, hopefully finalize in the fall, go out to bid the job in the winter, and construct in 2020. The option on the right is with DOT in that section that I can tell from the reaction that I got from many people's looks that, this would be the timeline though, just to present the facts and the data to you so you can see. And with that, that's all we have. So if you have any questions that we can answer, like I said, if you have the detailed questions you want to talk about in front of your property, specific things, we've got 3 stations set up with plans, and we can work with you for as long as you'd like.
We, actually, if we could, can we take that microphone out right there and possibly, just so the audience can hear, or just put, okay.
Oh, it is, okay. I'm Ernie Greppin at 490 Gay Street. I'm not opposed to the sidewalk. As a matter of fact, I'm one of the people that has accommodated, or Bobby and I have accommodated having it put behind the stone wall. But, so what happens with this is, we'll wait and see. But I'm very concerned that, I believe you're going to reduce the size of the road to 10 feet each way, correct?
The road would be 24 feet total,
What
10-foot
would be the
lanes,
pavement size?
24 feet.
20, so that would be 12 feet on each side. Is that the same as it is now?
In some areas, yes. In some areas, it'd be slightly less. It varies.
Well,
today.
in order to go out and get our mail, I can't empty my mailbox on the street side. I have to empty it from behind because the traffic coming down Gay Street is terrible. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have in most places, not in front of our house, but most of them, there's going to be a curb. And somebody riding their bicycle in whatever that small lane is going to be at great risk, because if he veers to the right, he's going to hit the curb and then be hit by whatever it is. A small child walking along the sidewalk, if he's by the curb and a truck comes along, the chances are he's going to feel the windage of that truck. Say if a 18-wheeler comes by, that creates a real draft. I don't think this is practical the way we've got the design currently. And I really think in order for this really to be successful, I think all the sidewalk has to be behind a stone wall in order to make it safe for everybody to walk along. And I respect my neighbors and my other fellow citizens who say, well, maybe we don't want to give our land to the town. You're giving up part of your privacy. I understand that. But I really think that we're creating an attractive nuisance. We're going to have young children walking along the sidewalk, and even older adults, and they're going to be in jeopardy if they're walking along, and right over here goes an 18-wheeler, creating a huge draft, and I don't think it's going to be that safe. So I leave it at that.
Hi, Rob Brace, 400 Gay Street. I'm one of the 11 who did not want to put it on the private side of the fence. But my question in terms of the process, Michael and Todd, is when all this started, whenever it was, a couple of years ago, it went to town meeting. Certain things needed approval, which you got. My memory might not be correct, but I was under the understanding that the state had earmarked some funding for this. I want to say in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million that also had a expiration period on it. Was that the case? And is that why you had to go back for this latest meeting? I'd be curious as to that, number one. And number two, if no state funding is available for this, what is the projected cost and what is the proposal to pay for it?
At the time, maybe it was discussed during that town meeting, we were referring to Complete Streets, that program that we've recently taken advantage of on a couple of different occasions. We might have said that could have been an option. At that time, though, there was no designation from the state, though, that this, in fact, would be a 100% slam dunk candidate for that. But what we wanted to do is at least start the process like we did well over a year ago, start with our percentages, our benchmarks, and then get to the point where we had to then sit with the state to see where we were at from a community standpoint, a level of impact standpoint, what our threshold was as far as potential of bicycle lanes. And that's when we had that discussion recently and found out, unfortunately, that the state, because we weren't able or weren't willing to accommodate bicycle lanes, this wouldn't be a candidate for any type of funding through their program. I'm sorry, what was the second?
Funding.
In terms of the projected cost, our cost estimate is
So on the low end, I'd say it's around 3. High
Yeah.
end would be 4. A lot of that's going to come down to the area by Milk Street with the retaining walls. We still have a lot of detailing to do on the retaining walls, and right now we're projecting almost $1 million in retaining walls.
And as far as the funding process goes, and I can't speak for everybody here, but I'm sure people are aware of, the talk about the potential, or what was a potential, of a road improvement bond that we were trying to pursue this year. Where this would rank on the priority list, we can't exactly say once the design is final. That would be for the select board and others to decide, what route this is going to go as far as prioritization within, what the town's looking at. There's obviously a school project on the horizon. Whether or not this is something that could potentially, timing-wise, go in sync with that project, but I don't want to say definitively. I think our goal right now, obviously, is to go through this process, vet out as many issues as we can, try to come to an agreement of some sort, have the select board approve our final design, and then have this sitting waiting for the time that's right. Whether it is next year, I would probably say not, but potentially the following year, or like I said, in sync with any school projects that might be on the horizon. Maybe that's the time to try to do a project such as this.
Would this need to be put to a town vote?
Certainly. The funding for it would need to be put to a town vote, and the approval for the final design, I believe the select board would vote to approve the final design once we come to that point, and then obviously the funding mechanism would require a townwide vote.
So Duncan McFarland. First of all, I was never contacted by anybody as to whether you want to find our stone walls or not. We own way over a quarter-mile of frontage on Gay Street, by far the largest amount, with various topographies. one option, which is obviously not available to us, is to put it behind our stone wall, because our stone wall, if everybody knows it, basically is on town lane, quote, the town stone wall, then is above it is flush back to our property. So to the extent that you would have to put the sidewalk there, that land is currently elevated as opposed to what's in front of that stone wall. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Also, and I don't think it's necessary, I don't know how far the town land is or our land is, but all of that land is protected by a conservation restriction, which makes it inviolate with respect to eminent domain or any access to that in terms of degrading that land at all. So I'm sure you're aware that that land is preserved by a CR. You know, and then when we look there where the land rises by Gay Farm Way, it rises there, and there's ledge coming in on both sides, which would require extensive blasting to bring that the sidewalk down to the level of the street, because basically it's a sloped ledge, so you couldn't put it above that because it goes back into the properties. So again, I was never contacted by anybody as to whether I would want to quote behind our stone walls either at 552, 570, or 590.
Oh, yes, I do.
Just to give a quick response, the reason that you weren't contacted was, if we go back to this slide here, when we looked at those three challenges, the topography being one of them, because of those steep slopes that you mentioned, we knew there'd be substantial impacts. So because of that, we ruled those properties out as feasible alternatives to do that.
Ellen McFarland, same property. Are you going to replace the trees that you cut down? And as to the stone walls, are the character of the stone walls going to stay the same? Because that's really important to us. And I'll tell you, it's going to be $1 million to redo those stone walls. I'm sorry, we had them repaired at great expense, and that was just repairing a few of them. So I know what it takes, but sounds good, but it's a big job. I mean, we own a wall that is probably, this tall. It's all wall that goes into the bank. That would have to be totally redone, and that's a long wall. That goes from Wheelers to, I don't even know how many feet of wall that is. It's a big wall.
And
So-
yes, and yes.
And so you will replant the trees?
The idea is to find places for trees to mitigate.
So when you take property from these landholders, do they get a tax refund?
I don't think there's any taken.
But it depends, when we've done it in the past, like the sidewalk project that we did for
Downey.
the Downey School, we met with the residents and then we gave them two options. There was one option that they could get paid cash for the value of the land as it was appraised by an appraiser, or we would give them a receipt, which then they could take a tax deduction.
So that's going to add to it?
Yeah.
I mean,
There's land taking costs, yes.
okay.
So I know that the technology is very advanced now because some of it's in your thing there. Why couldn't you prepare and send to all of us what this would look like on a pro forma basis? In other words, pretend it was done and you're driving down there with a camera and taking
Right.
pictures of what it's going to look like. I know you can do that with the technology. Why wouldn't we do that now?
We did that at some of the early, typically we do that at the conceptual stages to show the vision for at this point, at 50% design, we're into a lot of the really fine detail that you'll see on the plans. You can take a look with our engineers at the property and we'll walk you through those details.
Thank you for all your work. My name is, is this working? My name is Charlie Donahue. I live at 407 Gay Street. I've been there for over 20 years. And first of all, I think there's a lot of great ideas behind this, being able to walk from center to center, improve safety when I pull out the end of my driveway every day. There's somebody on a bike, some jogger, some kids walking. And ever since that woman on Winter Street in Norwood got hit in the back of the head by a mirror on a truck, she's jogging, the driver's, it's very dangerous. So if we can improve safety, because people aren't going to stop using it. They're going to continue to jog, run, and ride bikes. So I think anything we can do to improve safety, I'm for. The concern here, I think partly it's Gay Street was ranked in Boston Magazine as one of the 2 most beautiful streets in Massachusetts, okay? I'm concerned that we don't destroy that beauty. Engineers can do tremendous work. They can do a great job measuring things, but we have some history in Westwood. The Blue Hot Tavern just was destroyed. We're losing our history. So keep that in mind when you're looking for approval. It's a beautiful, beautiful street. We need to keep it. And I think we can keep it safer and maybe beautiful too. I think as you're reimbursing people for things, real estate people are now talking about, look at your property value if they destroy it. If they make it beautiful and don't change it, but the property value of that street is partly based on the street. And as real estate people start warning you, you better be sure that it's not ruining the street. I've been told by people I know who run that if you're putting down a concrete sidewalk, runners don't run on concrete. They run on tar, they'll run on the street, but I'd suggest as you're putting down a material, if you want runners and possibly walkers, concrete isn't good. I've seen some of the curbs, granite curbs in Westwood, and it makes it look like a shopping center. If you look at Gay Street today, down below where there are some sidewalks, the curbing is really like grass. Or you can't even see it, but it's a form of separation. But I think this idea of a granite curb is ugly. It makes it look more like a downtown or some area and not. So my challenge to you, and I don't think a typical engineer is thinking like this, is don't destroy the beauty, the history, and I think you can do that with a little more imagination, which I haven't heard yet. The stone walls are wonderful. What you do with them, and the property owner is fine. That's one of the parts of the beauty. I also like you to consider, there's a lot of places along Gay Street where if you went out 8 feet from the walls, there's a lot of space there. It could be, as Gay Street now exists, there's a lot of places on Gay Street where the side of the street is tar or macadam, and people use it. It isn't a formal sidewalk, but it's an area that people use. It's safe, it's off the street, and it's there. And I think you could not destroy the beauty of the street by just putting a little bit extra space to the side of it that people could walk down safely without making everything concrete and in granite. So thanks for the work you're doing. Try not to destroy the beauty of this street. And if you're going to be doing just like another part of Westwood on 109, a curb in concrete, you're going to destroy it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Luke Legere, McGregor, and Legere. I represent Duncan and Ellen McFarland. Just a couple questions to clarify what we've heard and seen. With respect to funding, do I understand correctly that you currently have funding sufficient to complete the design? And then once the design's complete, it would go to the Board of Selectmen for approval, and then on to town meeting to appropriate funds for the construction. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then secondly, some of the earlier slides had the matrix or matrices comparing the various impacts, and a couple of them showed street crossings. And do I understand correctly that street crossings was really just referencing crossings of Gay Street?
No, yeah, I can elaborate on that for you. With alternative 2, we showed 3 here. A street, there are actually more, whether you look, whether you're on the north side or the south side. This option has a crossing of Gay Street here, and then if you continued along, you'd use the existing crossing at Pine Lane here. We showed 3 because of the crossing at Milk Street, because it was identified as a very dangerous place to cross.
Okay, thanks. So just to be clear, when you're saying the chosen alternative had 0 crossings, it would still have to cross Fox Hill and Sandy Valley Road?
Sure. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Just like on the south side, it would still cross Gay Farm Road, Buckboard Lane. We didn't include those as part of the 3 as well.
Understood. So that was sort of what I was driving at. There's where it was 3 versus 0, there actually are.
Right, it was to highlight the 3 critical sections.
Thank you.
Crossings.
Good evening. Navnil Biswas, MD, 145 Gay Street. First of all, I was not contacted, and I specifically took time out of my ICU on-call schedule to be here tonight, just to be, just to see, where we stand. Number one, in terms of safety, I just wanted to point out something. The concentration or the density of population on Gay Street is far less than on Milk Street or Thatcher Street. In Thatcher Street is almost like, I don't know, probably half the size of Gay Street. And there's way more traffic going through Thatcher Street. The reason I know is because I have to go pick up and drop my daughter every day. And people are running there all the time. So why is it like, Gay Street is the most important? Why are we not focusing on the other streets also, which would be less in terms of monetary expenditure, and it would serve more people? Because I see more people going back and forth on Milk Street and specifically Thatcher Street rather than on Gay Street. And number two, in terms of safety, I think we should put mandatory restriction in terms of speed of traffic, because it was mentioned many times in the meetings, the Tresca brother huge trucks, they fly by every single time. They fly by. They don't care. They don't really see you. They don't see cars. Forget about pedestrians. So I think there are other alternatives in terms of if you're focusing on safety. And sorry, I was a little late. In this picture, is the red line proposing the actual route where the pavement would be, or the green one?
The green is showing the proposed sidewalk for each location. The primary reason for Gay Street is because the red line, today, if you looked at it today from Deerfield, this line is red all the way. And then you've got a section of green this way. So you've got a gap between the two villages. That was the focus for trying to connect the two villages and have that sidewalk connection.
Yeah, theoretically, yes, you're right, but again, practically, there are a lot of other areas which would actually be more important because people are pointing on safety, safety. Yes, I'm not opposed to safety. That's, foremost for everybody. But if safety is the issue, then we should focus on other streets which are much smaller and much more dense and much more riskier. Thank you.
Just to comment on the particular choice of Gay Street for this, I think the reason that we focused on this is it is a major artery to get to the other side of town, to Route 1A. If you were to put a sidewalk on on Thatcher or Milk, you'd be simply dead-ending at both ends, whereas Gay Street would provide you that level of connectivity to the other side of the community.
Hi, Bobby Wells at 375 Gay Street. I haven't been contacted at all, and I'm not happy about that. And I feel like the Gay Street residents haven't really been heard. I don't feel heard. I'd like to go big picture on this, and I'd like to ask, who walks on Gay Street? I walk every day, 5 miles, probably 2 hours. Many of you may have seen me walking around. I never see anyone walking on Gay Street. And I like the fact that there's not a sidewalk, because I happen to notice when there's sidewalks, cars go a lot faster and it's a lot more dangerous. When there's not a sidewalk, they slow down. So from my perspective, I'm now hearing that you're thinking about putting a sidewalk on my property inside of my stone wall, which makes me very unhappy. I haven't been contacted. I don't like that. I think it's going to ruin the street, and I think Gay Street is absolutely beautiful. I love the fact that it's a farm town, and we've all lived here, and we love the way it looks, and I think it's one of the reasons I moved to this town. So from my perspective, I just want you to know I'm not happy about this at all.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Forrester from 346 Gay Street, and I just wanted to say you didn't contact us. I'd like to hear more about how you can go and do work in the wetlands. I don't understand why and how. I really appreciate and moved to Gay Street because it was more rural. It didn't look like a 109. I do think the safety of children is important, and if you put it in, I'll support it. But I wanted to hear more about what you mean by us being able to keep the look of the stone walls. You know, if you're going to bring somebody in who does all the stone walls, they'll all look the same, and you'll take away the character of what Gay Street is. I worry about what kind of trees you're going to put back in, whether they're just going to be 2 feet high, and what they're going to be. I think we'd like to be part of that discussion. And my last thought is, I think it was only 3 weeks ago that I sighted a bald eagle on Gay Street. That's special. That doesn't happen. I think the last time a bald eagle was seen in Westwood was 1962 on Buckminster Pond. And it is special. And it's part of why we moved there. So I really, I think the gentleman here spoke so well about keeping the character and not making it look like every other street that's got granite side things and things. Let's consider how we can combine both. Because it's a special street.
I think over the past several meetings that we've had, I hope you believe in projects that we've completed in town. I know there's been some comparisons drawn to the Clabbertree Street project. And different projects have different looks, different feels. I believe, like, in what we do in trying to bring character to the community or maintain the existing character. And I think I've said from the initial meeting that with respect to the rock wall, with respect to the trees, with respect to the overall aesthetic value that Gay Street currently has, we would make sure within our means and everything that we can do from a design standpoint that maintains. Obviously, putting in a sidewalk is going to have an impact of some sort, but we're not looking to recreate the wheel with the rock walls that are there. In fact, when you drive down Gay Street right now, there's probably 40 to 50% of the rock wall that is completely buried and engulfed in brush and debris. It would be my hopes that you could expose that a little bit more, clean up that brush and debris as we're doing this project. And I know there was comments made, these guys are engineers and they're great engineers. I'm not an engineer. So I know what you're saying, and I joke around with Mike and Jonathan all the time that engineers tend to look at things a little bit differently. But I do have an extensive landscape background along with a criminal justice degree, but I can't combat the Tresca trucks. That's for the police department to do. But with respect to landscape construction, Brendan and myself are pretty well versed on that, and I don't know of too many projects in town that have been under our belt that we've taken and completely destroyed and ruined the community. And we've been doing this now, and I've been director for 8 years, and I can confidently say it. Someone can argue, but every project that we've had our hands on, we've done nothing but improve the aesthetics and improve the community, and I would look to do that with Gay Street.
Marty Greppin, 490 Gay Street. I was opposed to having the sidewalk come on the inside of our stone wall to begin with. And I was persuaded that who's going to really use this? Westwood High School track team and Severian Brothers. That's who runs on Gay Street. I was not aware that it was going to also be for bicycles. And that really, I am now totally opposed to having that sidewalk go inside our stone wall. I don't want a bunch of, and there are plenty of bicycles that go by on Gay Street. And I realize there is a safety factor, but that's for them to choose. And I don't think that we as homeowners have to accommodate all the bicyclists that want to come along with the few runners that I honestly believe are going to use it. As far as walkers, I don't think there's anybody other than Bobby Wells that's going to go out and walk on Gay Street. I'm sorry. I did it for a while. And every car that drove by me said, you know, this is very dangerous. You shouldn't be out here. They frightened me, so I came back in. But I think that's a concern. This is the first time I've heard that bicycles were part of the whole deal. The other thing I do worry about is it appears now the way you've got it proposed, if it's this one, going over Purgatory Brook is an issue, which obviously you know well. you sort of have to do that on the Milk Street side of the road. Am I correct? There's no
Where's the
room.
sidewalk?
Is there?
There's opportunities to shift the road a little bit, to buy some room there.
How are you going to shift the road?
To try and buy a little bit of space, because we are redoing the pavement surface as part of this too.
Okay, but you've already got a slight problem with that whole area of the road with the brook underneath it
Right, it's
and
a challenging section.
yeah, completely. Well, having had some of our land already taken by eminent domain, I'm not really crazy about thinking it's going to happen again. We get less and less land. We're old. Someday we're going to want to sell our house, and this is making a real impact.
Yeah, I'd like to just clarify, the bicycle, the intent is not to include bicycles in this project at this point. This last slide that I had for you was simply to show what it would look like if it were a state fund project. Right now, we're not going down the path of a state-funded project. That was the intent of this slide, just to show you that's what it would, you know, in case someone would raise their hand and say, I'd really like to see the state fund this project, this is what it would look like if the state funded. So the intent is not.
What you're proposing is not going to have bicycles on this.
This is what's still being proposed in general, yeah.
So,
5 foot
so just one
sidewalk.
question. So, to the extent there are wetlands, there are clearly wetlands there, will this have to go before the Conservation Commission, this project? But it's premature to, at this stage, right?
That would be one of our next steps this summer to go through.
Thank you.
I have a question. You said that there was no reason to contact us. If you're going behind the Greppens wall, we own the property right next to the Greppens. It's called Gay Street Rear. There's no address to it. You would have to go behind that stone wall. We own that stone wall. So nobody's ever contacted me about that. So
Because
that's
of-
a huge stone. That's that's more than the Greppens as far as frontage. So, hi, contact me, please.
And Steve's topography. We transition at the driveway, the Grevens driveway.
Good evening, I'm John Rogers, live at 35 Wentworth Street. I chair the Conservation Commission, and I thought maybe this is a good time for me to speak up about wetlands issues, which are there, not insignificant. But I did want to say a couple things. First of all, I have been following this. This is the first of these meetings I've attended, but I think they've done a great job at boiling things down in a quantitative way about what the alternatives are. There's a lot of qualitative issues that people are talking about that I think they can get to in the furthering of the design. A lot of those details still, but just did want to say that also I'm a PE. Worked on stormwater design for most of my career, infrastructure and the like. Worked for another DPW locally, and I grew up on Clapboard Tree Street. And we sold the family home not so long ago, frankly, for some of the reasons that people are talking about here. It's not safe to walk on Clapboard Tree Street, or to run on Gay Street, which I prefer to. I won't do it. It's unsafe. I mean, it's really a horror show to think about running on Gay Street, Clapboard Tree Street, Thatcher Street, Milk Street, but particularly Gay, which has got some straight segments where people tear along. It's just what people do, and what those roads allow them to do. And there's nowhere to go in some of those sections, including in front of Duncan's house. There's nowhere to go. You got to climb. You got to be quite agile to get by there if there's cars going either way. So just say that I think there is a need for this if we want to allow people to be able to get between one side of town and the other without having to face a gauntlet of very scary and dangerous traffic. So, I don't think we're sort of arguing any of those points. I think those are some details that need to be refined, including the wetlands issues as it goes over Purgatory Brook. There's pretty significant impacts there relative to the interest of the State Wetlands Protection Act and the town bylaw that I think will take a significant amount of discussion, but I don't see those as being
issues that couldn't be overcome. Some of overcoming that might be looking at pervious pavement in sections where we have an opportunity to reduce the stormwater impacts. And the other thing, I think there's another point that I want to, I'm a runner, not such a capable runner, a long distance runner anymore, but to me, just having an all-weather surface to run off that is away from the traffic, even if, as we were just talking about along Pine Street, the sidewalk's immediately adjacent to the road. Even that, and Pine Street's a relatively lower speed road, but even that is a little bit freaky, but nothing in comparison to Gay Street. Which brings me to, and to me it does not matter if it's asphalt or concrete, either's fine. I happen, as a professional, know that the concrete can be made to last longer, and it is frankly a better material, looking at life cycle costing. So that's a better investment. I guess my final point was that some of the detailed design, I think, aside from the aesthetics of the walls, which I support a lot of the discussion here, I think we want to try and retain as much in the natural character as possible. I think something has to give somewhere in certain locations, and I think we need to try and minimize that and try and get as much, as much as we can, as agreement with everybody that we're doing the best to minimize those impacts. And I sense that this design is getting there, getting pretty close to it, but the devil's in a lot of little details. One of the details, and this I don't know much about, and that is there is this concept of shy distances for roadways, which forces cars to slow down. And there's a fair amount being written about trying to slow cars down through neighborhoods and places like this. And I wonder if there couldn't be elements introduced to the project that would help, frankly, slow people down. I know it's not going to slow them all down. I remember being a 17-year-old driving on Clapboard Tree Street and making pretty good time around those corners. So, and the trucks that go through there. But I do think that shy distance issue, trying to find ways to make it so that people can't race down the road, or at least can't make it a drag race down there. So those were my comments. And
some of the features that are incorporated or preliminarily incorporated in this current design are, obviously, I know granite curbing was brought up. That is a traffic calming feature, as well as the lane width reduction down to 10-foot lanes. That also is a traffic calming mechanism, but your point well taken, and it's something that we can certainly look into.
I think to build up that too for a second, I keep hearing the theme too of the sidewalk being right up against the road as it's shown here. This is a typical section. It's difficult to show what that section looks like for all 8,500 feet of the corridor, but in every spot possible, there is a grass buffer between this curb and the sidewalk.
So I think this safety is spurious at best. I've lived on Clapboard Tree Street since 1972, 47 years. I used to run it every morning before my knees went out, and I walk it every day now, Clapboard Tree Street, and now we walk over to our other properties on Gay Street. I've never had a problem. I do not remember if there was ever an accident on Clapboard Tree or Gay where a pedestrian got hit. I'm not aware of that on either of these places. So I think this safety issue is, you're hiding behind it. You're hiding behind it, okay? It's been like this for 47 years. Let's give it another 10. Let's give it another 10. And again, people have heard me say this. I heard the same argument about the corner of Manhattan and Clapboard Tree. Everybody knows where that is, okay? And yes, there was a fatal accident or a bad accident, okay? So what the town response was, as said, we got to have traffic lights, we got to have turning lanes, we got to get rid of all these stone walls. It's, quote, not safe. So thank God one of the selectmen and me basically said, let's take a break on it, okay? Let's put in four-way stops. Let's put in better lines in the road and see what happens. And since then, there have been no fatalities, zero, okay? But think what the town response was if we wouldn't have blocked it. to have that intersection was been like that for 150 years. We gave it another 25. Maybe another 25 would be good. This is just overkill. We all moved to this town because this is what we wanted. If you wanted sidewalks, go to Norwood, okay? If you don't like what you got, why did you move here if you didn't like this? Why did you move here if it wasn't safe and you were going to live on that street? I don't accept any of those arguments.
With all due respect, my parents moved me here when I was 7 years old. And I stayed here for quite a few years, moved on and came back. And with all due respect, running Gay Street, Clapboard Street, or walking them may be fine with you. Scares the shit out of me. So, and I've done it recently, and I gave it up. It is, you're right, I'm not dead yet. So, being a bit facetious. I hear what you're saying. And given another 10 years, it'll be less safe. You know, but if we put in a sidewalk, we have a chance to give people, frankly, a chance. So I hear what you're saying, and understand that. My experience tells me that we'd be better off with a safer corridor for pedestrians along Gay Street.
So we wait another 10 years for another generation to grow up. My kids grew up here 15 years, no sidewalks, and they're out of college now. So what are we waiting for? Another generation to move in? I think we need the sidewalk. I'm at 130 Gay Street. I'm near Deerfield. So it's very easy for my kids to get to school, but it's still not safe for anybody to walk on Gay Street. So we definitely need these sidewalks.
Thank you. Michael Kraft, 30 Coach Lane. I'm also the chairman of the Pedestrian Bicycle Safety Committee. A few things that I want to say. First of all, we're walkers, my wife and I think many of the people on our street. In order for us to walk, we have to go out onto Clabber Tree and either cross, or what we actually do most of the time is drive to someplace that's more safe in order to walk, which is a disappointment because we don't want to have to do that. It means quite a bit of effort, especially if you want to take the dog and so forth. As the chairman of the Pedestrian Bike Safety Committee, we receive numerous people coming to our meetings or speaking to us outside of the meetings, unanimously favoring sidewalks in the town, very supportive of this project. I've heard no opposition whatsoever. And by way of shameless self-promotion, I would ask those of you who have concerns, I'm glad you've expressed them. It's very important to me. I think it's very important to Todd and to Mr. Gillette. Please come to our meetings. Speak up. We want to hear from you. It's going to be very helpful in this project. I've heard, I can't say for sure, but Todd, I think, partly confirmed it a minute ago, that traffic calming is a natural result of this project, that narrowing the street and putting up curbing, whether you like it or not, does have the effect of slowing people down. In terms of aesthetics, I have to say, Todd's worked very closely with our committee, and we've seen his work throughout the town and his eagerness and energy in terms of not only doing these projects that are very useful for pedestrians and bicycles, but doing so in a way that is really aesthetically pleasing as best that we possibly can. And so we're really working very hard to accomplish those objectives. And it is very important to us. And it's very important to me. I agree with those of you who live on Gay Street. That is a beautiful street. I would be terribly disappointed myself if the sidewalk totally destroyed that beauty. I think there's a way to do it. I think that these folks are working very hard at doing that, and I encourage them to do that. In terms of those of you who are concerned that nobody walks on Gay Street, the reason for that is quite simple. It's too dangerous. That's why they're not there. They would walk on it if they were able to do that. They would walk on it, they would run, they would do more. There'd be more outdoor activity taking place there. That's just a fact. In terms of bicyclists, I know that's a concern. It would be a concern of myself as well as a pedestrian. Those who are road bikers do not want to ride on sidewalks. That's not what they do. They ride on the road. That's the safer place to ride. It's a more direct way for them to go. They can go faster. So those are the things that I have to add.
By definition, if bikers are using the same path that people are walking, they are going to hit people. So am I confused? Are they going to use separate paths, or are we proposing the same pathway? Because now a biker is going to hit a person walking from behind, and he's going to fall on the road and be trampled over by a truck or a car.
The sidewalk doesn't include bicycle accommodations. Does not.
And also, I think speed cameras and mandatory heavy penalty is the only way to stop people from, speeding, because most people think that hurts people is monetary fines. That's the only way, because if you leave to their own judgment, unfortunately they don't. So I think that's the very easy way. It would also generate a lot of revenue for the town.
I have a question. I've heard a lot about the narrowing of the travel lane would slow down the traffic, but I haven't heard anything about a creative solution, and I don't know if this is what was mentioned earlier with the shy topic, but where there would be speed bumps that would slow down the traffic. So as you would approach, you'd have a section of roadway which would be elevated, thereby causing you to have to slow down and not speed along Gay Street. And the other thing that I haven't heard is any discussion or consideration about lowering the speed limit. So I would challenge the committee to look at other ways as well to improve the traffic on the street.
I will say, obviously, we've had a few traffic calming projects within the community, and fortunately, I inherited the initial one done off of Conant Country, Dover Road. And I'll say to everybody in this room, if you drive down those roads now, if you want to talk about taking the character away from a road in a sense, you start putting in speed humps. With every speed hump comes approximately 4 signs. The other challenge, though, and they are effective, but you talk about aesthetic impacts. The other challenge with those, though, too, are line of sight conditions. You do have a couple of straightaways along Gay Street that you might be able to entertain. But after that, once you get past Thatcher and start going down by Sandy Valley and hooking around by Milk and then hooking back around and heading towards Pine Lane, I can guarantee you the line of sight warrant that you have to meet for the criteria to install the devices wouldn't be met. So I think, off the top of my head, the only section of roadway that you could possibly think about doing that would probably be from Deerfield to Thatcher. That would be your best bet at a speed hump. And then at that point, people are so agitated, they do nothing but pick up speed to try to make up for the time that they lost. And it's true, that's what happens. So.
My name's Charlie Domina. I'm at 95 Fox Hill Street. I'm curious about 2 things. Number one, if this design for that roadway provides any more safety for bicyclists as what they have right now. And secondly, have any speed studies been done on Gay Street? Are we in fact having people speeding on Gay Street? I know concrete trucks, certainly if a concrete truck goes by with 35 miles an hour as opposed to a Honda Accord at 35 miles an hour, it's quite different. And I'm curious to know if really there's any speeding on Gay Street.
To answer your first question on the bicyclist, on this side of the road, there would certainly be no change. It would be the same as it is today, as edge of pavement. Yes, this would be a little more challenging for a bicyclist, having a 6-inch vertical curb next to that if they're trying to head down Gay Street.
Basically, there's no improvement.
For bike, no. With a corridor like this, this is what it looks like for safe bike accommodations. It's a 38-foot roadway and a 40-foot right-of-way. No, I didn't think so either. And then to your question on, we have data on we had tubes that we put tubes down in the road, the 2 little black tubes you see. We have that data. We can certainly pull that together. I don't know off the top of my head. I know the speed limit varies, but we do have that data. Yeah.
Jeff Lawrence, 587 Gay Street, right across from the McFarlands. I have 2 real issues with this. Even though this is not being proposed to go so immediately in front of our house, but on the other side. I think we're truly, I totally agree with the comments about the aesthetics. I don't see how you can all at one fell swoop with one contractor reproduce the evolution of 200 years of stone walls. It just is impossible. And I don't think you're going to ever be able to produce or reproduce what we have come to enjoy after all these years. And I've lived in our house almost 30 years. It's just, I don't see how that's possible. And I think you're going to destroy what is truly, as this gentleman over here said in the corner, one of the most beautiful streets in the state of Massachusetts. The other thing I really continue to be concerned about is safety. I cannot imagine upping the level of pedestrian traffic, Tresca trucks going at 50 miles an hour 2 feet off a sidewalk. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. It just makes no sense. How does it improve safety? I think you're going to invite people to increase the pedestrian traffic, and the trucks are going by there, and I don't know, I've never counted them. I bet there's hundreds that go by every day. I just think it's not the right solution. And I don't know why we're trying to invite more people into what actually is a very hazardous environment. It's not a good answer, in my mind.
Good evening, everyone. Michael Young at Sandy Valley Road. So my question, in listening to all the commentary tonight, would be to Todd and to Mike. Would you ever consider dividing this project into 2 parts and doing the sidewalk all the way down to Sandy Valley and seeing how that comes out? And most of that is separated from the street because you've already got permission to move that, not directly with a curb and all that. It would also address Duncan's issues and maintain probably the most aesthetic part of Gay Street. And maybe you give it another 10 years and see what happens on the remaining section of the sidewalk. Now, I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to say it's not going to connect the 2 villages. But my understanding was the whole purpose of trying to connect the villages was to secure state funding, which it seems like that's already gone away. So maybe you, and by the way, you probably dropped like $2 million in costs because you've eliminated Purgatory Brook and you've eliminated the worst part of the stone wall issue. So would you ever consider, I've never heard it come up, would you ever consider a 2-part program and we can kind of, see how the first phase goes before looking at revisiting the second part?
I'm always open to consider anything. I think this is a decision that the select board would have to make, though. It's our goal right now to design the entire corridor. If the select board or the general public had, attended meetings and persuaded or discussed this with the select board and they wanted to take it in that direction and do it in a couple of different phases or just have one initial phase, that would be a decision as the road commissioners that they would have to make. And we would just implement whatever decision that they would want to incorporate or go for. Personally, I think if you do a project like that, I think it could prove to be more costly at the end of the day because now you're dividing the contract into 2 phases or potentially 2 phases and you have to now rebid again, whereas in one swoop you could have one full section done with one contractor there and not have to go through the process twice. So as far as the overall cost, I can all but guarantee it would end up being more if you decided to do the second phase. But I understand what you're saying as well. And my answer to that would be the select board would ultimately have to make that final decision of what approach they'd want to take.
Okay. Well, thank you for that answer. I hadn't heard that suggestion before, so I wanted to bring it up as a component of the meeting.
I'll just add, though, originally when we conceived this project, one of the alternative funding sources we kicked around, it's still a viable possibility. There's different state programs. One is Safe Routes to School, and we have 2 schools on either end, and then a section in the middle. There was some thinking that we might be able to piece it together in different pieces or phases to accomplish some of the funding through different sources, and then leaving only a portion of it to the town to have to fund. And whether those got done simultaneously or in phases, would be another matter we'd talk about.
That seems a little confusing, because I think we heard all year tonight that state funding is not enough.
Now, there are two different programs.
There's different programs through the TIP
Yeah,
process.
so,
Yes.
yeah.
There are opportunities through Safe Routes to School to try and tie these projects to school as well. Yeah.
Safe Routes to School isn't as stringent with their requirements as far as having to provide all the criteria by which the TIP program or the Complete Streets program wanted us to do. But that said, for an example, we just applied for a Safe Routes to School project at the Martha Jones District. It was a great project, but we fell a little bit short. I think some of the reason is that we've been blessed so far to have a couple of good successful projects recently through the Complete Streets program. We already had a Safe Routes to School project already approved and received funded for, so they look at us as kind of, how much do you guys want to keep coming for type of community. We're aggressive with things. Sometimes it comes back and bites you a little bit. But to go backwards a little bit too, I know in town meeting when we initially went for the design money, it wasn't to say that we were 100% going to drive this off of obtaining state funding to fund the construction of this. That's always my goal, ultimately, is to try to get any outside money, any outside funding possible. Unfortunately, this is the second time in about a month that I've been said no to, and it sucks. But I mean, we don't have any other option right now unless we open up the corridor to a 38-foot project, which I don't want to do to the community. And it means a lot to me too. My grandparents had a house on Deerfield Ave. I've been here since Bergson's was in the town, the toast of the town, or whatever it's called. So I've been here. I've grown up in this area and just recently moved here. So I get what you guys are saying. I'm not in it to throw an asteroid down Gay Street, but like the gentleman, Mr. Rogers said, it has to be a little give and take with what we're trying to incorporate. There's people in the room that are for this, there's people that are against, but ultimately we're just trying to get a design that everyone can walk out of here and say, we did the best. We, all of us, not just me, not just Brendan, Mike, or John, or Mike, all of us work together, and I think we're getting there. It's just things like this that we have to try to work through.
What is the genesis of this project? I've heard tonight a couple of times to connect the villages. And I'm not sure what the village is down on the Dedham side. You've got Hogan Dyer down there. I mean, why is this project even being considered? I kind of feel like it's being forced upon everybody.
I don't necessarily think we're trying to force it. I think my approach to things is always take a proactive approach, not a reactive approach. And the last thing I want to do is be in a situation where someone questions me as why didn't you look into this? We're not saying we're going to do this, but we're certainly looking into it. I never want to be in front of a camera and saying, okay, well, we're gonna look into this and we're gonna come up with a way to correct what happened. There are a lot of demands. Mr. Kraft spoke on behalf of the Pedestrian Bicycle Committee. There are a lot of demands and inquiries throughout the community. Even more so now. I don't know if it has anything to do with an influx of new residents coming in with younger kids, younger families, but there is a lot of inquiries pertaining to pedestrian safety, children walking to and from school, and just overall safety. Connectivity obviously is a driving force to some degree, but nothing trumps pedestrian safety, and that, I think, essentially is the driving force behind this. And to be proactive again and not be reactive to an unforeseen or an unfortunate circumstance.
And I think, just go one step further, the connection is the Gay Street intersects with Pine Lane and School Street, and that would be the connection to the center of Islington and the center of Westwood, or the main part of Westwood.
I don't understand that part. Do people really want to walk from one end of Gay Street over to Islington? I just don't.
Yes.
I'm Karen Manor Metzold, not a Gay Street resident, but I live off of Summer Street. I have a few just points of additional information I'd like to share for us to consider. One is I'm a member of the Westwood Land Trust and have been a member for almost 15 years. When we, as the town and the Land Trust, go to the state to request to have a conservation restriction placed on a property, one of the selling pieces is scenic views for all to enjoy. We have 2 of the 12 properties the land trust currently stewards is located. These 2 properties are located on Gage Street, and there might be other opportunities in the future. So just want people to be aware of that, that's one consideration the state has. We've talked a lot about walking. I love to walk. I've walked on almost every street in this town, and lovely Hale Reservation too, so that's always a great place to walk. Also an avid biker, and my husband and I are both avid cyclists. That's the one piece right now that as I get older, I'm getting more hesitant to cycle on busier roads. And that one piece next to the granite, if the sidewalk were there on that one direction bound, I would be much more hesitant with the traffic that's on Gage Street as a cyclist, and I'm a pretty experienced cyclist. So, point of information.
Hi, I'm Kate Wynn, 10 Cedar Hill Drive. I do really appreciate everyone being here tonight. This sidewalk matters quite a bit to me. I live just on the other side of the Hanlon. I have 2 students, a middle schooler and a high schooler. And currently we have this wonderful library that they can't get to. We have lovely, all kinds of things right here on 109. That is not for them, unless I drive them, which puts me on Gay Street in a hurry, which is not what anybody wants. I love Gay Street. I love the 4-way stop sign at Clappertree and Manhattan. That was a change at the time that it was made. I'm sure not everybody was pleased with it. But now it's one of the lovely defining features of our town. It's just a place where you stop and appreciate what's there. So I have so many, I really want this sidewalk. Our side of town they can never walk to high school. They can never walk to middle school. If they need to get home and I can't get them, they wait. My children wait for hours because it is not safe for them to get home. They have friends on this side of town. People like us on this side of town. My kids can't get to their friends on this side of town, and their friends can't come to our house without assistance from a car. It just can't be done. And in this day and age, in a town like Westwood with smart, good people, I feel like we can do better for all of our residents with a sidewalk. It happens to be Gay Street. It happens to be that Gay Street is the most direct route, the easiest to finish, from what I can see. I'm not quoting someone else. But it's an important project. We cannot wait 10 years. 2 years is too long for me. My kids have one childhood, one. It's in Westwood now. Thank you.
Just for clarification, properties who will be on the opposite side where there won't be sidewalk, how are they going to reach the sidewalk? They will cross the Gay Street, correct? Okay,
Yeah.
so my 2-year-old daughter will cross the Gay Street to go to primary school?
So one of the things. Do we have are there any in the design yet, crosswalks to side streets? No, not yet. So one of the things we would be looking at as we advance the design is trying to look at some of the side streets to see if there are opportunities to put in a crosswalk so that people coming down Thatcher could get to the other side. If there's people in the room that want to see that, if there's opportunities, if it's safe, those opportunities are there. They're not incorporated in the design yet, but that would be something we would be looking at.
No, I mean that. I live on Gay Street, 145.
Okay.
So I will have to cross Gray Street to go to the other side of where there will be pavement, right? There won't pavement on both sides, isn't it? Right. So effectively, I still have to cross, which is way more dangerous because people do not stop. Even at the four-way stop signs, they do not stop. They do not obey. Like they don't give right away to 1, 2, 3, 4. People just go. So I'm not trying to be opposed. I'm trying to look into the actual reason, which is safety, and trying to find out which is the best way to enhance and ensure safety. I think, and one more thing I would like to point out, the trucks, it's very easy to block trucks. we can generate a no permit for trucks to enter that road. End of story. Because, like, for example, you go down Williams Tunnel, you cannot go there. It's big, bold letters it's written. Hazardous materials cannot go there. Same way we can do that. If you have a big cement truck, please use a bigger road. This is, I mean, it looks bigger, but this is still a residential community. So speed limit across the United States is 30 miles per hour, but in Gay Street it's 40. Right, so, thank you.
Part of the time that I was away from Westwood, lived in central Ohio in a community that has a road a little bit like what we're talking about here. It connects two sides of a relatively small town outside of a city, outside of Columbus, Ohio. And it goes by schools, a couple schools, and actually it's right next to the police station. There's a 20 mile per hour speed limit. It's a very straight road, very flat road, great sight lines. It begs, like Gay Street, to go really fast. But they enforce the 20 mile an hour speed limit. As somebody growing up, learning how to drive in the Boston area, that ran against the grain for me. But I'll tell you, you slowed down. The police kept after it on a very, very regular and consistent basis. And everybody slowed down on that. And if they didn't, they got pulled over. And I think for all that, we might do for traffic calming, and you might do for reducing the amount of trucks that go through there, I don't think it's just a truck issue. I think it's a speed issue. It's a narrow road issue. I agree also. It is a gorgeous corridor, and I don't want to see that compromised. But I think we can come up with a solution, and I think part of the solution may be that it really is a sort of a critical enforcement corridor for speeding, and the speed limit, 40 mile an hour, is probably just too fast, even though you can easily go 50, 60 miles an hour, and I've seen people do it as I've climbed up adjacent to Bartlett's property trying to run through there. So. Just one more thought.
30 to 40, ranges from 30 to 40.
I don't live on Gay Street, and I'm sympathetic to those whose properties are affected. But I am a walker, a runner, and a bicyclist who has walked, biked, and ran on Gay Street before. And in my opinion, it's not safe. There are times when there are less than 6 inches of width between the fog line and the woods. And the last time I checked, every human being on the planet was wider than 6 inches. I think another point is my wife and I live off of Hartford Street, and we would definitely walk down to Islington if there was a safe way to do it. And studies have shown repeatedly that businesses that have sidewalks and places for bicycles to be parked, businesses go up. They make more revenue when people can get to their businesses through walking and through biking. I've almost been hit twice in this town as a pedestrian, once in a crosswalk. I was almost hit by an older woman who was speaking on her cell phone, and once on a sidewalk that had no berm or curb, I was almost hit by a young male driver who was texting on his phone. So I can't believe that it's not more dangerous now than it was years ago in Westwood. There are more cars on the road, people are under more stress to get to places, and there were no cell phones. And the number of distracted drivers that are out there, I think warrants a sidewalk on Gay Street. And I totally trust Todd and his team to create a sidewalk that is aesthetically pleasing, will blend in with the town. Thank you.
I'm just going to say something about the speed limit. The way the speed limit works, and I've heard Paul Sakai, if he were here, he would be giving this and not me, but I've heard him 1,000 times do this. The speed limit is regulated by the state. The state requires that we conduct an analysis of the speed that cars are traveling, the assumption being that people would travel at a safe speed. And the speed then is set at the 85 percentile. That means not in the middle, but on the 85 percentile, toward the higher speed. And that's the speed limit we have to put on the roadway if we do those. Now, I've been in front of many, many neighborhoods that want to reduce the speed, and my advice to them after Paul gives that explanation is, please, please don't ask us, because what you're going to get is not what you want. You're going to get a speed that's higher, not lower than the one you've got. So that's the state regulation. That's the way it works. What they don't let, and maybe Ohio doesn't do this, they don't let individual communities establish a speed limit. The assumption being that people are traveling between communities. They don't want one community establishing 20-mile-an-hour speed limits through their town.
Boston has done this. They said 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. It's not being enforced, but it's 20 miles an hour.
Again.
And the one before that, they lowered it to 25, but that's City of Boston.
City of Boston. And the other thing is that speed limits are only effective if you enforce them. That part of it I got, and that really is required.
They'll probably catch most of us on Gay Street.
Yeah, you travel it more than anybody else, so.
But it is, apparently, because Boston set the speed limit, it was 25, and then they reduced it to 20. And then the exception is where they post a higher one, like the VFW Parkway is 35, but that's the exception.
Steve Olenoff from the Pedestrian Bicycle Committee. Let me explain this. If a road is not posted, which is that process that Mike Gillette just gave, where they do a speed study and then create the posted speed limit, then you get that posted in it. But if it's not, and it's a heavily, it's a what they call a thickly settled roadway, the speed limit is 30 miles an hour. That's what you're supposed to be. Now, there was a new law, only a few years old, that allows a community, and Dedham has done it, Boston has done it, that you can say any non-posted road will now be 25 miles an hour instead of 30. Boston has said they want to change that to be able to do it 20, but right now Boston is 25 miles an hour, but that's only on roads that are not posted with any speed limit. The ones that have had the speed study, you have a higher amount that's been posted. So we have that option here in Westwood. In fact, the Pedestrian Bicycle Committee asked the Selectmen, would it be a good idea to do it? And then Paul Saccard explained to us all the problems that you have in doing that. It is it gets a little bit confusing for people when you enter and you see a sign that says 25 miles an hour, and then you see another one right after it says 35 or 40. Say, what's going on? But we have that option. We were thinking about it. So far, we've decided not to go through it. So that would be the only thing. But the speed limit on Gay Street, that study was done way back in the 50s, I believe, and this hasn't been changed since. And that's what the people happen to be going back then. And yeah, so the problem is if you do have a new study, it might actually be higher. And certainly on the end section there where you see it drop to 20, that would definitely go up nowadays. So that's a choice, but I don't think the town's ready for the 25 mile an hour. But though it would be a good idea on all the unmarked side streets, 25 miles an hour would be good.
Is that it? Any other comments or questions? So at this point, what Brendan and I, Mike and John are going to report back to the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board, I'm sorry. We're just going to give them an update as to, how this meeting went, some general feedback, along with the feedback that we received from the state, and just give them just an overall update of pretty much where things stand at the 50% current design. At that point, we're going to continue on with our design and probably host another public hearing. What are you thinking for timeline as far as?
Towards the end of the summer? Yeah.
Towards the end of the, well, I would
Probably the early fall.
Yeah, early fall, I
yeah.
would
Yeah,
think,
gotcha.
will probably be our next benchmark. And at that point, we're probably going to be right around 90%, would be a fair assumption. Mr. McFarland, I heard, and it was a great point, conceptual design, that's something we'll look to incorporate. Various things, all the way to maybe some details as far as options that we could have, as far as tints that we can apply to concrete, and just different aesthetic little features that I think would help with the entire process. And I apologize to those individuals that didn't receive notification. I can assure you we do our best. We don't try to leave anybody out. We work off of a mass mail list and do our best, whether it's internet or phone calls or mailings, but I can assure you you won't be missed from here on out. And that said, I thank you all for coming and appreciate everybody's level of interest in this project. Thank you.